So today I'm going to be reacting to a war movie that involves Michael Caine. No, it's not A Bridge Too Far 2, An Even Further Bridge. This is something else. It's looking at the story of a Royal Navy veteran who fights in the Second World War, escapes from a nursing home to go attend the 70th anniversary commemorations of D-Day in France. I felt compelled to do a reaction video to this movie. I don't do too many of them, but this one made me really feel like I needed to look at it because I've got a couple of things I'd like to say about it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brad St. Croix. I run this YouTube channel. I have a PhD in military history. Obviously have a very much an interest in these topics. So a movie about a Second World War veteran returning to where he fought is something really, really interesting to me. So before we begin, obviously it's got Michael Caine in it. Caine himself was a military veteran. He served in Korea with the British Army, conscripted to fight there. Maybe some of these elements of this movie will be drawing on his own experiences, and there's a few areas I want to touch on that. Look at that. Let's get into it, and I'll go through and give my thoughts as we watch.
Right. Soon as we've had some grub, I'll take you for a spin along the front. And when we get back, I think they've got a male stripper for you. What?
So I just wanted real quick. I love that type of humor from someone of that age. I've known many people of that age, from that generation. You wouldn't expect someone from that generation or that time period to have that kind of humor, but a lot of them do. So I think that's a great inclusion in the movie.
I'll make that last bit up.
I want to go to France.
As you can see here, it's the 70s.
What are you on about?
The trip to the beaches, D-Day. Really sorry, Bernie. You left it too late.
He obviously disagrees with that.
You all on your own.
Unless you have to.
So right there, that's something I wanted to talk about real quick, is the relationship, right, between Verna Jordan and Irene Jordan there. They were married for many, many years. They didn't want to leave their spouses or partners for an extended period of time of that age, because you never know, right? You never know when someone might pass or something might happen. So that bond is quite strong, and I really, really like that part of this. And hopefully they dig into that quite a bit, and we'll see why I think they will in a second here. As I said, this movie is about Verna Jordan, who served in the Royal Navy during the Second World War and was present at the D-Day landings.
Where is he? He's disappeared off the face of the earth. He's in France.
Bonjour.
At 90. Well, he has done it before.
True.
Only then, of course, they were shooting at him.
So determined to honor his fallen comrade, the D-Day veteran made a break for the coast and mounted.
So that comes up again, the idea of honoring fallen comrades, and I will touch on that again in a later scene they're showing in the trailer.
What has now been dubbed the Great Escape.
Who are these people?
They're Germans.
Oh,
This was your beach.
yeah. Me too.
Looks like they're going to show D-Day, so that's good. It looks like the graphics are quite well done. They match the conditions on the day, right? Quite gray. This channel was stormy, rough waters that day. The invasion was famously postponed by a day due to difficult weather conditions and a storm in the channel. It looks like they got that right. Tanks there. It looks like it's on a LCT because of the open top. Again, just quick view and a quick guess from a couple viewings. An LCT bringing tanks ashore on one of the British beaches because that is a British unit. You can tell from the beret and also later on in the trailer why that is. And that's one of the relationships that the movie, based on everything I'm seeing here, will be central to why Verna Jordan returns to Normandy on this set anniversary.
At your age, Adele, you cling to every second and every...
So something else I want to talk about here is the potential relationships that Irene has, right? Obviously with Bernard, her husband, but also those taking care of her. This is a really interesting time period to look at. Not a lot of movies talk about veterans kind of in their advanced ages, right? Saving Private Ryan did it a little bit, very briefly, with Ryan returning to Normandy and going to the American Normandy Cemetery, finding the grave of Captain Miller to show his family and to thank him and, ask his family, the good life and all of that when he was still able to travel there. And that's obviously in the late 90s. So that's a different time period than now when this is set roughly 10 years ago. But what the bigger point is, people at that age need help a lot, right? A lot of you know that. And they develop relationships with the people who give them that help. And I hope we see that here. We tend to think of the veterans and those of that age as tough, and a lot of them were tough as nails. I know a lot of them were tough as nails, but everyone needs help at certain points, and this is one of them. So I hope they dig into those relationships a little bit, give Irene her, share of the story. Obviously, she's a big part of this because they've alluded back to Bernard, not wanting to leave her. So clearly it's important. It's important to the plot. So hopefully this is included in the story, because Irene obviously has an interesting story here as well. And I hope they dig into that a little more. And this just isn't snippets for a trailer.
Every second is worth
There's more of a
clinging to.
flashback.
I'm sorry, Reed. I've been in the papers.
More from
I've been
D-Day,
on TV.
I'm assuming. I don't know.
90-year-old coffin dodger.
And
Honest.
so also going back to that scene there, I forgot to mention, is the reconciliation. That's a big part of a lot of veterans' experiences. Some of them didn't want to. On the German side, Allied side, they didn't want to reconcile with their former enemies. And that was well within their right. They earned that right. Many Allied veterans were upset with what the Germans had done, their conduct during the war. In a lot of cases, rightfully so, right? A lot of war crimes carried out by the Germans, both SS, the Wehrmacht, that includes the Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine, the Heer, all of it, all branches. But also the treatment, obviously, of people during the Holocaust and all the other crimes was too much for some to get over. Some were willing to do that. Again, that's their right. It's not about my opinion on this. It's what they did, what they wanted to do. So hopefully they dig into that a little bit in terms of that scene there. I don't know if it's real or if it's a fabrication or if it's, something that's a little more beefed up for a movie. Maybe there was a meeting, but it wasn't really a conversation. I don't know much about Jordan's service or his experiences there. I mean, I remember hearing about this over 10 years ago before, again, I was really back involved in history again. So I wasn't really paying too much attention. Probably should have been, but I wasn't. So if you know more details, please leave a comment down below. It'd be great to hear any stories you might know or your experiences hearing about this story with Jordan. I know a lot of people were there for the 70th. It was a big anniversary, lots of veterans. A lot of them were able to travel, which I think is going to be in stark contrast to next year for the 80th, where we've lost so many veterans, and the ones who are still with us have difficulty traveling. Some of them still do it, which is amazing. I saw a D-Day veteran in the Netherlands not too long ago. He was also fighting in there, Canadian, and he plans to keep doing it. So that's amazing. Jim Park, he's an amazing man. I think that's something to keep in mind from looking at this movie. Hopefully they dig into the reconciliation and what that means, right? Coming to terms with what the war meant. There's other things that not everyone gets over when it comes to the war.
The glorious dead. What a waste. Hey. What a waste.
If you want to
He's at the grave of one Lance Corporal Bennett of the Nottinghamshire Yeomanry. What I think is interesting here is they show the two on what appears to be, again, an LCT. So I don't know if they're friends from, say, when they're younger or from military service, because they're in different branches, right? One's in the Navy, one's in the Army. Not sure what the relationship is there. So again, if you know, leave a comment, please. So what I want to key on here is obviously the pain that's felt. Like I mentioned before, Caine is a veteran himself, fought in Korea. I don't know much circumstances beyond, what I've heard him talk about in interviews. He talks generally about his experiences in Korea and being involved in patrols, coming into contact with the enemy, being under fire. I don't know personally, did he lose friends in Korea? Possibly. It's hard to say one way or the other. But I don't know how much, say this is acting in that part where he's, not necessarily not having to dig deep about a loss in a war because he was in one himself. And another thing I want to touch on too is the idea of the waste. Obviously, Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan had to be stopped. I don't think that that's up for debate. But for those having to do the stopping, the average person having to go through this, living their lives, and all of a sudden it's disrupted or ended because of this, right? It's a difficult thing to take. It's for those who survive, it's not going to be, easy to reconcile that with the mass amount of casualties there are and those who died in the war. So obviously there's that going on here as well. So there'll be questions about, cost of war, why the war happened the way it did. Hopefully that brings up a little debate within the movie and generally speaking amongst people about the cost of war and what that war meant. And hopefully that's balanced well with things like reconciliation, which we saw in the earlier parts there, but also the suffering of losses. Now, I'm not saying be angry at anyone who fought for the Nazi state during the war. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's more complicated than that. It's intensely personal, is something to keep in mind. Not one size fits all. Someone wants to be angry and had gone through that, that's their right. Someone wants to reconcile, but also still mourn their loss of their friends. Those two things fit together as well. I'm not saying it's black or white, lots of gray here. To some people, it's black and white, but to some, it wasn't. So that's all I'm saying here is looking at these different relationships and how they fit and how they're influenced by these historical events. I think this movie, again, based on a couple of viewings of the trailer and thinking about it, is based on relationships. I think that's the core of it. Obviously, it's the story of Jordan, flying the coop and going over to Normandy on a ferry and meeting up with all these people and becoming an international sensation. It's obviously about that, but I think at its heart, it's going to be about relationships. And that's something that tends to sometimes get lost in history. We forget about down to the individual level of what these events mean. So I always like to put faces to names and more to it. So I think this is a great way to do it.
I'm not your friend, Bernie. You've spent 70 years
that relationship
loving
there.
me.
I'd go anywhere with you.
In the flashback,
We
they're
have
great.
never wasted 1 second of
The
our
relationship between
time
the two of them is amazing
together.
to see, and really interesting part of it. And the title is awesome, obviously.
Are you coming to bed?
Yours or mine?
Oh,
Again, that humor is fantastic. So as you saw there, the movie comes out this autumn, October. Interested to see it when it comes out. Maybe I can give more thoughts on it depending on when it's available in North America. I don't know if that's a North American release or not. Kind of a postscript, obviously, to this story because this happens roughly 10 years ago. Both Bernard and Irene have passed. They passed within a week of each other in early 2015, which is really heartbreaking, obviously, for their families, those who knew them. It's a heartbreaking thing to have a loss. That relationship looks solid and strong of decades of being together. I married myself, and my wife always says that's what we should do. Like we have a say in that, but that pass within as close as possible to each other, so one of the other is not left alone. It's kind of fairy tale in that way, but it's reality. These two pass within a week of each other. It's again heartbreaking and sad, but also kind of heartwarming in that sense that they were not separated that long, and it's not talked about in the trailer. So I thought that would be a really interesting piece to keep included here. A couple of things, again, the D-Day scenes, we'll see how intensive they are, what they cover. Maybe they do more in the story between Bennett and Jordan. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. I'd like to dig into that. And again, like I said, Irene, Jordan stories. Obviously, as well, I'd like to see and her experiences, and maybe they touch on her life during the war. That would be great to see, and how these two came together and all of that. And then again, balancing things like reconciliation and war loss, and particularly the Second World War and what that means for our society. It's not a clean war. It's not necessarily, the quote unquote good war, but there's two clear sides here, and one was better than the other. So we'll see how that's handled, if it's handled at all. I've linked the original trailer down below. I've done other reaction videos looking what people have made on YouTube from bigger organizations and some other media. So you can watch that now.